2 months after my best friend James died from what the doctors called aggressive heart failure, his lawyer called me to her office in downtown Chicago. She locked the door, pulled the blinds, and handed me a cold, silver USB drive. She said, "David James left you a message with strict instructions. He said to watch it alone, and whatever you do, do not tell your wife, Emily." What he warned me about in that final video did not just break my heart. It saved my life and exposed a killer sleeping right next to me. If you have ever trusted someone with your life, only to find out they were holding the knife, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments what city you are watching from. It helps me feel less alone in this big, cold house. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely hold the paper cup of water Sarah Jenkins handed me. I blamed it on the cold rain battering against the floor-to-ceiling windows of her office in the Loop. Or maybe it was just old age finally catching up to me. At 70 years old, you expect things to start breaking down. You expect the morning nausea, the hair thinning a little faster than usual, the constant fatigue that makes your bones feel like lead pipes. I thought it was grief. I had just buried James, my best friend of 50 years, a man I played golf with every Sunday, a man who had been a private investigator for 3 decades before retiring. We were supposed to spend our golden years complaining about politics and drinking scotch. Instead, I watched him wither away in 3 months. Sarah did not sit behind her mahogany desk. She stood by the window looking down at the gray traffic on LaSalle Street. She looked terrified. This was a woman who had handled my multi-million-dollar real estate contracts for 20 years without blinking. Yet today, she looked like she wanted to run. "William," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper, even though we were the only 2 people in the room. "I am breaking attorney-client privilege by giving you this today. James made me swear to wait 60 days. He said if I gave it to you too early, you would not believe it. He said you needed time to feel the symptoms." I tried to laugh, but it came out as a dry, hacking cough that tasted like metal in the back of my throat. "What symptoms, Sarah?" "I am just old, and I am sad. James died of a heart condition. We all saw the reports from Dr. Sterling." Sarah turned around. Her eyes were red. She walked over and placed the small silver drive into my trembling palm. It felt heavy, heavier than it should have. "Just watch it, Bill. Right here. Right now. And please, for the love of God, prepare yourself." She turned her monitor toward me and plugged the drive in. I adjusted my glasses, wiping a smudge of rain from the lens. I expected a sentimental goodbye. I expected James to tell me to take care of his boat, or to donate his collection of vintage watches. The video player opened. The face that filled the screen made me gasp. It was James, but it was from his final days. His cheeks were sunken. His skin was the color of old parchment, and he was hooked up to an IV drip. But his eyes were not the eyes of a dying man who had accepted his fate. They were sharp. They were angry. They were the eyes of the investigator I used to know. "Hello, Bill," the video James said. His voice was raspy like dry leaves scraping together. "If you are watching this, I am dead. And if my calculations are correct, you are currently sitting in Sarah's office feeling like you have the worst flu of your life. Your stomach turns when you smell bacon. Your hands shake when you try to sign a check. And you probably found a clump of hair on your pillow this morning." I instinctively touched my head. I had found hair on my pillow that morning. A lot of it. I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. "Bill, listen to me," James continued, leaning into the camera lens. "I did not die of heart failure, and I certainly did not die of natural causes. I was murdered, and the same people who killed me are currently killing you." I stood up, knocking my chair back. This was insane. James was on heavy morphine at the end. He was hallucinating. That had to be it. I looked at Sarah, begging her to tell me this was a joke, a bad reaction to medication. She just stared at the floor, her arms crossed tight over her chest. "Sit down, Bill," the video voice commanded. I sat. "I know what you are thinking," James said on the screen. "You think old James lost his mind. You think Dr. Sterling is a good man. You think Emily is the perfect wife. You think she is just a sweet woman 20 years younger than you, who fell in love with your charm, not your $28 million portfolio." The mention of Emily made my blood boil. Emily had been an angel. She had nursed James. She was currently at home, probably knitting or planning our anniversary dinner. "I started digging," Bill James said, coughing violently. "Before I got too weak, I ran a background check on our good friend, Dr. Richard Sterling. Did you know he lost his medical license in Ohio 10 years ago for overprescribing opioids? Did you know he changed his name? And did you know that he and your wife Emily grew up in the same foster home in Trenton, New Jersey?" My mouth went dry. Emily told me she was from a small town in Oregon. She said she had no family. They are playing the long game, Bill. They used a slow-acting poison on me. Thallium. It is tasteless, odorless. It mimics natural illness. By the time anyone figures it out, the body is cremated and the evidence is gone. They practiced on me because I was the only one who would have caught them. And now you are the main event. I stared at the screen, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. This was impossible. Just this morning, Emily had kissed my forehead and told me I just needed rest. She was so gentle. "You do not believe me," James said, his voice getting weaker. "I know you. You are loyal to a fault. So I need you to do one thing. Just one thing. Tonight when you get home, Emily is going to offer you a cup of tea. It will be chamomile. She will say she put a special type of honey in it to help your throat. She will insist you drink it while it is hot." I felt the room spinning. Every night for the past month, Emily had made me tea. She said it was for my digestion. "Do not drink it, Bill. Whatever you do, do not let that liquid touch your lips. Spill it. Fake a stumble. Pour it in a plant. But get a sample. Put it in a vial. Bring it to the address I put in the text file on this drive. If I am wrong, you can piss on my grave. But if I am right, God help you." The video cut to black. The silence in the office was deafening. The only sound was the rain lashing against the glass, sounding like handfuls of gravel being thrown at us. I looked at Sarah. "Did you know?" I asked, my voice barely audible. She shook her head. "I only knew he was afraid. He gave me the drive and told me that if I gave it to you too soon, you would confront Emily, and she would just change her method. He said you needed to feel the sickness to believe the betrayal." I stood up. My legs felt like jelly. I grabbed the USB drive and shoved it deep into my coat pocket. I needed to get out of there. I needed air. I felt like the walls were closing in on me. I took the elevator down to the lobby, my mind racing through 20 years of memories. Emily laughing at our wedding. Emily crying at James's funeral. Emily handing me my medicine this morning. It could not be true. James was a paranoid old cop. He saw shadows where there were none. But as I walked out into the cold Chicago rain, waiting for the valet to bring my car, I looked down at my hand. It was trembling so badly I could not even zip my jacket. I remembered the metallic taste in my mouth that had been there for weeks. I remembered how Richard Sterling always seemed to be at our house lately, checking my blood pressure, smiling that white, perfect smile. My car pulled up. I got in and gripped the steering wheel. The leather felt cold. I turned onto Lakeshore Drive, heading north toward the Gold Coast, toward my mansion, toward my wife. The drive usually took 20 minutes. That night, it felt like an eternity. Every time my windshield wipers swished back and forth, I heard James's voice. "Do not drink the tea. Do not drink the tea." I tried to rationalize it. Emily loved me. We had a prenup, sure, but she had always been so disinterested in money. She volunteered at the animal shelter. She cried when we watched sad movies. Killers do not cry at movies. Killers do not remember your sister's birthday. But then I remembered something else. Last week, when I was bent over the toilet retching, Emily had stood in the doorway. She had not rubbed my back. She had not called 911. She had just watched. At the time, I thought she was paralyzed by fear. Now, as the streetlights blurred past me in the rain, I wondered if she was checking her watch. I pulled into the driveway of our limestone estate. The house was dark except for a single warm light in the living room. That was my favorite room. It was where we sat every night. I turned off the engine but didn't open the door. I sat there in the dark, listening to the engine tick as it cooled. I was a man who had negotiated deals with the toughest unions in Chicago. I had stared down mobsters in the 80s. I had never been afraid of anything. But tonight, staring at my own front door, I was terrified. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my shaking hands. I had to go in. I had to know. If James was crazy, I would find out tonight. And if he was right. I opened the car door and stepped into the rain. I unlocked the front door and stepped into the foyer. The smell hit me instantly. It was the smell of home. Lavender, old wood, and something else. Something sweet. Honey. William Emily's voice floated from the living room. Is that you, darling? You are late. I was getting worried. I walked into the living room. A fire was crackling in the hearth. Emily was sitting on the velvet sofa wearing that silk robe I bought her for Christmas. She looked up and smiled. It was the most beautiful smile in the world. It was the smile I had woken up to for 15 years. You look exhausted, Bill, she said, standing up and walking toward me. She placed a cool hand on my forehead. You are burning up. Did you see the lawyer about the estate planning? I nodded, unable to speak. I was afraid my voice would betray me. Good, she said softly. You need to rest. Sit down. She guided me to my armchair. She fluffed the pillow behind my head. Then she turned to the coffee table. I made you something, she said, reaching for a porcelain cup that was sitting on a silver tray. It is your favorite. Chamomile. And I put in a little bit of that special organic honey Richard brought over yesterday. He said it would help with the nausea. She turned back to me holding the cup. Steam curled up from the amber liquid. It smelled sweet. It smelled comforting. Here, she said, extending the cup toward me. Her eyes were blue and wide and filled with concern. Drink it while it is hot, darling. It will make all the pain go away. I looked at the cup. I looked at her hands. They were steady. Mine were shaking. I reached out. Thank you, Emily, I said. As my fingers touched the warm porcelain, I knew. There was no turning back. The trial had begun. Not in a courtroom, but right here in my living room. And the verdict would be life or death. My fingers tightened around the handle of the delicate porcelain cup, the heat radiating through the ceramic and into my cold skin. It was a warmth I had craved just moments ago, a comfort against the chill of the Chicago rain and the terror of Sarah's office, but now that warmth felt like a warning. I lifted the cup slowly, my eyes locking with Emily's. She was leaning forward slightly on the velvet sofa, her breathing shallow, her lips parted in eager anticipation. It was the look of a child waiting for a birthday present to be opened, or perhaps a predator waiting for the trap to snap shut. The steam rising from the amber liquid carried the scent of chamomile and that thick, sweet, organic honey she had mentioned. Underneath it, or perhaps only in my paranoid imagination, there was something else, a faint, acrid note that made my stomach churn violently. James's voice screamed in my head, loud and desperate, telling me to drop it, to run, to do anything, but let that liquid pass my lips. I watched the steam curl around my nose. I brought the rim closer. Emily's smile widened just a fraction, her eyes darting from my face to the cup and back again. She was watching my throat. She was waiting for the swallow. I knew I could not simply refuse it. If I put the cup down and said I was not thirsty, she would know. She would know I knew. And if she realized the game was up, I had no doubt that Richard Sterling would be here within 10 minutes, with a syringe full of something much faster than thallium. I had to play the part. I had to be the frail, deteriorating old man they believed they had created. I let my hand tremble. It wasn't hard. The fear coursing through my veins made my muscles spasm naturally. I allowed the china to rattle against the saucer, a sharp staccato rhythm that echoed in the silent living room. "Oh, Bill." Emily cooed, her voice dripping with that false saccharine pity. "Let me help you." "No," I wheezed, feigning a stubborn pride. "I can do it." I brought the cup to my lips, tilting it just enough so the liquid touched the very edge. I held my breath. Then, with a calculated jerk of my wrist, I let my arm collapse. I threw my weight to the right, mimicking the sudden violent tremors that had plagued me for weeks. The cup flew from my grip. It did not hit the floor. Instead, it crashed directly into the large ceramic pot of the ficus tree that stood next to my armchair. The sound of shattering porcelain was like a gunshot. The hot tea splashed across the dark soil and splattered onto the expensive Persian rug. No. The scream that tore from Emily's throat was not the cry of a concerned wife. It was guttural, primal, and filled with a sudden, blinding rage. It was the sound of someone who had just watched a winning lottery ticket burn. Her eyes, usually so soft and blue, bulged from their sockets. For a split second, the mask slipped completely. I saw her teeth bared, her fists clenched at her sides, her entire body vibrating with the urge to strike me. It was a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. I shrank back into the chair, my heart hammering against my ribs, not acting this time. I was genuinely terrified. I had just destroyed her weapon, and she knew it. But as quickly as the monster appeared, it vanished. She blinked, took a sharp breath, and the mask of the loving wife slid back into place, though it sat a little crookedly now. She rushed over to me, kneeling by the chair, ignoring the broken shards. "Oh my God, Bill. Are you hurt? Did the hot water burn you?" Her voice was high-pitched with panic, but her eyes were cold, scanning the mess, calculating how much of the poison had been lost. "I am sorry," I stammered, playing the part of the confused, helpless invalid. "My hand. It just gave out. I am so clumsy." "It is okay, darling. It is okay," she said, but her hands were gripping my knees hard enough to bruise. "It is just tea. We can clean it up. But look at you. You are shaking all over. You need that medicine. You need the honey." She stood up abruptly, stepping over the mess. "I will go make another one. Right now. It will only take a minute. The kettle is still hot." "No," I said, perhaps too quickly. I coughed to cover my panic. "No, Emily, I can't. My stomach. The smell. It is making me sick." She froze halfway to the kitchen. She turned slowly, her silhouette framed by the hallway light. "Bill, you have to drink it," she said, her voice dropping an octave. "It is for your own good. Richard said it is the only thing that will stop the tremors. Just 1 cup. I will put it in a sippy cup if I have to, so you do not spill it." The menace in her tone was subtle, buried under layers of faux concern, but it was there. She was not asking. She was commanding. She needed that dose in me tonight. I gripped the armrests of the chair, using every ounce of strength I had left to push myself up. My legs felt like rubber, but I forced them to hold my weight. "I am going to vomit." I lied, putting a hand over my mouth and making a retching sound. "I need to lie down. Now." I did not wait for her permission. I shuffled toward the stairs, moving as fast as my condition would allow. I heard her take a step toward me, then stop. She was weighing her options. If she forced me, it would look suspicious. If she let me go, she missed a dose. "Bill, wait," she called out, frustration bleeding into her voice. "Let me help you up the stairs." "I can manage," I gasped, grabbing the banister. "Just let me sleep. Please, Emily." I just want to sleep. I climbed the stairs, feeling her eyes boring into my back like twin drills. I expected to feel a hand grab my ankle, or to hear the rush of footsteps as she came to finish the job manually. But the house remained silent save for the ticking of the grandfather clock and my own ragged breathing. When I reached the landing, I risked a single glance backward. Emily was standing in the middle of the living room, motionless. She was not looking at me. She was looking down at the ficus plant. Her hands were on her hips, her posture rigid. She looked like a general surveying a battlefield where a skirmish had been lost. I turned and stumbled into the master bedroom. I did not go to the bed. I went straight to the heavy oak door and turned the brass lock. The click echoed in the room, sounding louder than thunder. For 15 years, we had never locked this door. We had an open-door policy. Locking it was a declaration of war. I leaned my back against the wood, sliding down until I hit the floor. I gasped for air, clutching my chest. I was alive. I had survived the tea, but I was trapped in my own house with a woman who wanted me dead. I sat there for a moment, listening. I heard her footsteps downstairs. She was moving around the living room. I heard the clinking of glass, the sound of a dustpan. She was cleaning up the evidence. Curiosity, morbid and dangerous, overtook me. I needed to see. I needed to know if James was right, if the poison was as potent as he claimed. I crawled across the carpet to the small balcony that overlooked the living room. It was an architectural feature I had always loved, a way to feel connected to the house even from the second floor. Now it was a vantage point. I peered through the wooden slats of the railing. Emily was gone, likely in the kitchen disposing of the shards. The living room was empty. The single lamp cast long, distorted shadows across the room. My eyes were drawn to the ficus plant in the corner, where the tea had soaked into the dark earth. I squinted, adjusting my glasses. At first I thought it was a trick of the light, or perhaps a bug crawling across the dirt. But then I saw it clearly. The soil was moving. Where the amber liquid had pooled around the roots, the earth was fizzing. Tiny white bubbles were rising to the surface, popping and hissing faintly. It looked like acid eating away at the organic matter. The hardy green leaves of the lower branches where the splash had hit were already curling inward, turning a sickly shade of brown before my eyes. I clamped a hand over my mouth to stifle a sob of horror. That was meant for my stomach. That bubbling, corrosive sludge was supposed to be inside me right now, dissolving my lining, shutting down my organs one by one while I slept. James was right. God help me, he was right about everything. I scrambled back from the railing, crawling on my hands and knees like a frightened animal. I retreated to the far corner of the bedroom, as far away from the door as I could get. I pulled my knees to my chest and wrapped my arms around them, rocking back and forth. Downstairs, I heard the vacuum cleaner start up. It was a normal domestic sound, the sound of a wife tidying up after a clumsy husband. But to me, it sounded like a monster clearing the bones from its den. I looked at the digital clock on the nightstand. 9:15 p.m. The night had only just begun, and I knew with a terrifying certainty that the lock on the door would not be enough to keep the morning from coming, or the doctor. I needed a plan. I needed help. But first I needed to survive the night without closing my eyes, because if I slept, I knew I would never wake up. I woke up with my back pressed against the cold drywall, my knees stiff and aching from hours of curling up on the floor. The morning light filtering through the heavy curtains was gray and unforgiving, casting long shadows across the bedroom that felt less like a sanctuary and more like a crime scene waiting to be discovered. I listened intently before I moved. The house was silent. No footsteps, no humming of appliances, just the settling groans of a large, empty estate. I pulled myself up, using the nightstand, my joints popping in protest. I was alive. I had survived the night. But the victory felt hollow as I unlocked the bedroom door, the mechanism clicking loudly in the stillness. I had to go downstairs. I had to see the damage. I had to know if the nightmare was contained to my imagination or if it had left physical scars on my reality. I descended the stairs, slowly gripping the banister with a white-knuckled intensity. When I reached the living room, the smell hit me first. It wasn't the sweet scent of honey anymore. It was something earthy, rotting like wet leaves left to decompose in a gutter. I looked toward the corner where my armchair sat. The ficus tree was dead. Overnight, the lush green leaves had turned a brittle, sickly yellow, and many had fallen, creating a dry carpet around the pot. But it wasn't the plant that made my breath catch in my throat. It was what lay beneath it. Mr. Whiskers, my Persian cat, the one creature in this house that had offered me unconditional affection for 10 years, was lying on his side near the base of the planter. His body was rigid, his legs extended in an unnatural stretch that spoke of a final, agonizing spasm. His mouth was open and a crust of white foam had dried around his muzzle. I rushed over, falling to my knees, ignoring the sharp pain in my hips. I touched his fur. He was cold. Stone cold. I looked at the ceramic saucer under the plant pot. It was dry. He must have come down in the night thirsty and lapped up the toxic runoff that had pooled there after I spilled the tea. Oh God. I whispered, tears pricking my eyes. I killed him. I spilled the poison and he drank it. My grief was interrupted by a noise from the kitchen. Footsteps. Emily. I stood up quickly, my mind racing. I couldn't let her see me cry. I couldn't let her know that I understood exactly what had happened. But the rage was rising in me, hot and uncontrollable. I grabbed my phone from my pocket and dialed Richard Sterling. I didn't think. I just reacted. If he was her accomplice, I wanted to see his face when he saw his handiwork. I wanted to see if he had a soul left to shudder at the sight of an innocent animal killed by his chemistry. Richard was barked into the phone when he answered on the second ring. Get over here. Now. Bill, you sound agitated. Is it your heart? His voice was calm, professional, sickeningly smooth. It is an emergency, I said, and hung up. Emily walked into the living room, then holding a cup of coffee. She stopped when she saw me standing over the cat. She looked at the dead animal, then at the dead plant, and for a fleeting second, a look of annoyance crossed her face as if she had spotted a stain on the carpet she would have to pay to remove. Oh, Bill, she sighed, walking over but keeping her distance. I told you that cat was on his last legs. He has been wheezing for weeks. He was fine yesterday, I snapped, my voice trembling. He was playing with a string yesterday. He was old, darling, she said, taking a sip of her coffee. Animals die. It is sad, but it happens. Why are you so worked up? You look flushed. I stared at her. She was drinking coffee 5 feet away from the creature she had inadvertently murdered, and she didn't even blink. 20 minutes later, the doorbell rang. Richard Sterling breezed in, carrying his black medical bag, looking like the picture of suburban success in his polo shirt and khakis. He looked at Emily, a quick, silent communication passing between them, before turning his attention to me. What is the crisis, Bill? He asked, setting his bag on the coffee table. Look, I pointed at the cat. Look at him, Richard. Look at the foam. Richard crouched down. He didn't touch the cat. He didn't check for a heartbeat or look at the eyes. He just glanced at the body and stood back up, wiping his hands on his pants, as if even the proximity was dirty. Heart failure, Richard stated flatly. Very common in this breed. The foam is just fluid from the lungs. It happens. It is not heart failure, I shouted, my control slipping. He drank the water from the plant that died overnight. Richard stepped closer to me, invading my personal space. He smelled of expensive cologne and antiseptic. He reached out and grabbed my wrist, his fingers pressing hard against my pulse point. Your heart rate is 120, Bill, he said, his voice dropping to a warning tone. You are hyperventilating. You are paranoid. This is exactly what we talked about last week. The dementia is making you see connections that aren't there. I tried to pull my hand away, but his grip was surprisingly strong. I am not senile, Richard. I know what I see. Emily stepped up beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. Richard, do something. He is going to give himself a stroke. He has been like this all morning, ranting about the plant. Richard nodded, keeping his eyes locked on mine. He reached into his bag with his free hand and pulled out a pre-filled syringe. The liquid inside was clear. It looked innocent. It looked like death. I am going to give you a sedative, Bill Richards said, uncapping the needle with his teeth. Just a little cocktail to bring that blood pressure down. You need to sleep. You are not thinking clearly. No, I said, backing away, stumbling over the ottoman. I do not want it. It is not a request, Bill Richards said, advancing on me. I am your doctor. I am making a medical decision. Emily held his arm. I saw it then. It wasn't just a glance. It was a shared nod, a tightening of the jaw. Emily moved toward my left side, her face set in a grim mask of determination. They were going to do it right here. They were going to put me down like a rabid dog in my own living room, and then they would call the crematorium and say I died of grief over the cat. Panic surged through me, sharp and electric. I had to get out, but I couldn't fight them. Richard was 20 years younger than me and fit. If I struggled, they would overpower me. I had to be smarter. I had to use their own narrative against them. I slumped my shoulders, letting my body go limp. I put a hand to my stomach and groaned, bending double. I am going to be sick, I gasped, retching loudly. My stomach. It is the diarrhea again. I need the bathroom, now! I lurched toward the hallway, away from them. Richard hesitated. He didn't want to deal with a mess. He lowered the syringe slightly. Go, he said, disgusted. Go clean yourself up. But when you come out, we are doing this. Do not lock the door, Bill. I stumbled into the downstairs powder room and slammed the door. I didn't lock it. I turned on the faucet full blast to mask the sound of my movements. I didn't use the toilet. I moved to the small window that opened into the side garden, but it was too small for me to fit through. I looked around frantically. My eyes landed on my old gym bag that I kept in the closet under the stairs, which connected to this bathroom via a small utility door. I grabbed the bag. It was empty. I opened the bathroom door a crack. They were whispering in the living room. Richard was saying something about dosage. I slipped out, not toward them, but back toward the living room entrance, staying low behind the sofa. They had their backs to me, looking at the ficus tree. I reached out and grabbed Mr. Whiskers by the scruff of his neck. He was heavy, a dead weight in my hands. I shoved him into the gym bag and zipped it shut. Why, I don't know. Maybe I needed him with me. Maybe I knew that without his body, nobody would believe me. A dead cat with thallium in its system was proof. A story about a dead cat was just the rambling of a crazy old man. I didn't go back to the bathroom. I sprinted or moved as fast as my old legs could carry me toward the kitchen. I went out the service door that led to the garage. I burst into the cool air of the garage, my chest heaving. I threw the bag into the passenger seat of my sedan and scrambled into the driver's side. My keys were in my pocket. Thank God I never went anywhere without them. I pressed the start button. The engine roared to life. Through the door, connecting the garage to the house, I heard Emily scream. Bill! I didn't wait for the garage door to fully open. I threw the car into reverse as soon as there was enough clearance. The side mirror scraped against the metal track with a screech of tearing plastic, but I didn't care. I shot out into the driveway, spinning the wheel tires, squealing on the wet asphalt. I saw Richard running out the front door, the syringe still in his hand. He looked ridiculous, like a villain in a bad movie, but the terror he inspired was real. He shouted something, waving his arms, but I was already accelerating down the long driveway. I turned onto the street without checking for traffic horns blaring around me. I didn't look back. I drove with a singular, maniacal focus. I wasn't going to the police. They would call Richard. They would believe the doctor. I wasn't going to the hospital. Richard had privileges there. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the piece of paper I had printed from the USB drive. It was an address in an industrial park on the south side of the city, a private toxicology lab. James said they didn't ask questions. They just ran the tests. I looked at the gym bag on the seat next to me. I reached out and rested my hand on it. "Hang on, buddy," I whispered, my voice cracking. "We are going to get them. We are going to get every single one of them." I merged onto the highway, merging into the flow of trucks and commuters, a 70-year-old fugitive in a luxury sedan with a dead cat in the passenger seat, driving toward the truth that would either save me or kill me. Here is the continuation of the script, following the exact parameters and outline provided for Scene 4. The industrial park on the south side was a graveyard of rusted corrugated steel and broken windows, a place where businesses went to die quietly. I pulled my sedan up to a nondescript brick building with no sign, just a faded number painted on the metal door. I grabbed the gym bag from the passenger seat, the weight of it settling in my stomach like a stone. I was carrying my dead friend, my only witness, into a place that smelled of chemical solvents and old secrets. I rang the buzzer. A camera swiveled to look at me. A moment later, the lock clicked with a heavy thud. I stepped inside. The interior was shockingly sterile, a blinding white contrast to the grime outside. A man in a lab coat met me. He didn't ask my name. He just looked at the bag and nodded. "James sent you," he said. It wasn't a question. "James is dead," I replied, my voice hollow. "I know," the man said. "He sent the payment in advance." "Bring it here." I placed the bag on a steel table. The man unzipped it. I looked away. I couldn't bear to see Mr. Whiskers like that again, stiff and matted. The technician worked quickly, taking samples of the fur, swabbing the mouth, and taking a small scraping of the soil that was still caked on the cat's paws from where he had scratched at the dying plant. "Wait here," he said, disappearing behind a glass partition. The wait was an eternity. I sat on a plastic stool, listening to the hum of machines, the centrifuge spinning the truth out of the lies. My phone was silent. I had turned it off. I knew Richard and Emily would be tracking me, calling me, maybe even calling the police to report a senile man on the loose. I was a ghost now. 40 minutes later, the technician returned. He held a piece of paper. His face was grim. "It is positive," he said, handing me the report. "Thallium sulfate. Heavy concentration. It was once used as rat poison, but it has been banned for consumers for decades. It is colorless, tasteless, and dissolves instantly in water or tea." I stared at the chemical peaks on the chart. It looked like a mountain range that had killed my cat and was meant to kill me. "It causes hair loss," the technician continued, ticking off the symptoms on his fingers. "Nerve damage, tremors, gastrointestinal distress, and finally, cardiac arrest. It is a painful way to go, Mr. Harrington. It is a cruel way to go." I folded the paper and put it in my pocket. "Thank you." "There is someone waiting for you in the back office," the technician said, pointing to a door I hadn't noticed. "He said you would need the rest of the story." I walked to the door and opened it. Sitting behind a metal desk, illuminated by the blue glow of a laptop, was a man I recognized from old photos James had shown me. Mike. He was older now, his face lined like a roadmap of bad decisions, but he looked solid. He looked like a man who could handle a fight. "Sit down, Bill," Mike said, not looking up from the screen. "We don't have much time." I sat. "James told you." "James told me everything," Mike said. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He slid it across the desk. It hit the metal with a heavy slap. "He hired me 6 months ago when he first got sick. He didn't trust the doctors. He didn't trust her. And he was right." I opened the envelope. Photographs spilled out. They were old, grainy, some taken with telephoto lenses. "Meet your wife, Mike," said his voice hard. I looked at the first photo. It was a wedding picture. A younger Emily, maybe 20 years ago, smiling radiantly in a white dress. But the man standing next to her wasn't me. It was a heavyset man with a kind face. "That is Gary Wilson," Mike said, pointing a calloused finger at the groom. Hardware store owner in Tampa, Florida. Married in 1995. Died in 2000. Heart attack. Left his widow $2 million. I shuffled to the next photo. Emily again, hair dyed blonde, this time standing on a boat next to a tall, thin man. Robert Vance, Mike continued. Oil executive in Houston. Married in 2003. Died in 2008. Sudden cardiac arrest. Left his grieving wife $5 million. I felt bile rising in my throat. I flipped to the third photo. Emily, with dark hair, looking sophisticated, clinking champagne glasses with an older gentleman. Arthur Pennington. Venture capitalist in Austin. Married in 2010. Died in 2015. Massive stroke. "Guess who got the house and the portfolio? She killed them," I whispered. "All of them." "Her name isn't Emily," Mike said. "It is Laura Sullivan's. She was a nurse in Trenton before she realized she could make more money burying husbands than saving patients. She disappears after every payout. New hair, new name, new backstory. She finds a target, usually older, usually wealthy, usually lonely. She plays the perfect wife for exactly 5 years. That is her gestation period. Just long enough to get into the will, get into the trust, and get into your blood. 5 years. I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. "Our 5th anniversary is next week." "Exactly," Mike said. "You are on schedule, Bill. You are the retirement plan. $28 million is her biggest score yet. She is not going to walk away from this. And she is not working alone." "Richard," I said. "Dr. Richard Sterling." Mike nodded. Or as he was known in New Jersey, Ricky, the chemist Sullivan's. He is not just her accomplice, Bill. He is her brother. My head swam. The doctor who played golf with me. The man who checked my blood pressure. Her brother. It was a family business. A slaughterhouse disguised as a marriage. "I am going to the police," I said, standing up, clutching the file. "I have the report. I have the cat. I have these photos." "Sit down," Mike barked. It was a command, not a suggestion. I froze. "You can't go to the cops," Mike said, his voice dropping to a fierce whisper. "Not yet. Look at what you have. You have a dead cat with poison in it. Richard will say the cat got into rat poison in the garage. You have photos of her past marriages. Being a widow isn't a crime. Marrying rich isn't a crime. You have a toxicology report from a private lab that Richard will claim is unaccredited or biased. He is a licensed physician with a clean record in this state. He has been documenting your dementia and heart condition for months. If you go to the police now, they will call Richard. He will show them your medical file. He will say you are paranoid delusional grieving your friend. They will put you in a psych ward, Bill. And in a psych ward, you have no control over what you eat or drink. She will finish you off in a week, and the state will sign the death certificate." I sank back into the chair, defeated. "So what do I do?" "Just let them kill me, no," Mike said. He leaned forward, his eyes burning with intensity. "We have to catch them. We need undeniable proof. We need to catch her in the act of administering the poison, or catch them admitting to the murders. We need a confession on tape, or we need to catch Richard switching the meds." How I asked. "They are in my house. I ran away." "You have to go back," Mike said. "Go back?" I looked at him like he was crazy. "They tried to needle me in the living room." "You have to go back," Mike repeated. "But not yet. We need a plan. We need to make them think they have won. They think you are a scared, senile old man running from a hallucination. We are going to use that. We are going to let them think you are dying. We are going to let them get sloppy. Arrogance is their weakness, Bill. They have done this 3 times without getting caught." They think they are gods. But gods bleed. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small translucent vial and a tiny earpiece. "This is the antidote," he said, handing me the vial. "Prussian blue. It binds to the thallium in your gut and helps you pass it. Start taking it now. It won't cure you overnight, but it will keep you alive. And this," he pointed to the earpiece, "is how we stay in touch. I have already bugged your house. James and I did it 6 months ago when you hosted the charity barbecue. We have ears in every room." I stared at the small devices. I was no longer William Harrington, retired real estate mogul. I was a soldier in a war I hadn't known I was fighting. "You are going to play the sick man," Bill Mike said. "You are going to be weaker than you have ever been. You are going to let her plan the funeral. You are going to let her think the money is hers, and when she reaches for the check, we are going to break her hand." "But I ran," I said. "How do I explain running away?" "You didn't run," Mike said, a cruel smile touching his lips. "You had a dementia episode. You got confused. You went for a drive and got lost. When you call her in an hour, you are going to be crying. You are going to be scared. You are going to beg her to come get you." I looked at the file, at the faces of the dead men who had come before me. I owed it to them. I owed it to James. And I owed it to the fool I had been for 5 years. "Okay," I said, pocketing the antidote. "Give me the phone." I was ready to make the call. I was ready to walk back into the spider's web. But this time I wasn't the fly. I was the poison. The plan Mike and I concocted required a performance worthy of an Academy Award, and I was terrified I would choke on my lines. I called Emily from a payphone near a gas station 3 miles from our house, sobbing into the receiver, telling her I was lost, confused, and that the shadows were chasing me. She arrived 20 minutes later, not with a hug, but with a sharp, annoyed grip on my arm as she shoved me into her car. She smelled of cleaning supplies, likely from scrubbing away the last traces of Mr. Whiskers. Back at the house, I let my body go limp. I allowed her to drag me up the stairs, my feet scuffing against the expensive hardwood she was so proud of. I played the part of the broken man, perfectly mumbling nonsense about my father, about the cold, about the cat. She dumped me onto the bed, stripping off my jacket with rough, impatient movements. "You need your medicine, Bill," she said, her voice tight. "You are getting worse. Richard said this would happen if you missed a dose." She went to the bathroom and returned with a glass of water and 2 blue pills. I knew these weren't my blood pressure medication. These were the chemical shackles she was using to bind me to this bed. I opened my mouth obediently. As she tipped the glass to my lips, I used the trick Mike had taught me in the back office. I let the water pool in my cheek, sliding the pills under my tongue. I swallowed audibly, coughing a little for effect. "Good," she said, smoothing my hair back with a touch that felt like ice. "Now sleep. Just sleep." She left the room, leaving the door slightly ajar. As soon as she was gone, I spat the dissolving pills into a tissue and shoved it deep inside my pillowcase. Then I took the small vial of Prussian blue antidote from my pocket and swallowed a dose dry. It tasted like chalk and hope. I lay back, adjusting my position so I could see the room through the slit of my eyelids, and waited. I didn't have to wait long. 20 minutes later, I heard the front door open. No doorbell. No knocking. Someone had a key. Heavy footsteps ascended the stairs, confident and familiar. "Is he out?" Richard's voice drifted from the hallway. "He is gone to the world." Emily replied, her voice lighter, now stripped of the fake concern she wore around me. "I gave him a double dose. He will be drooling on himself until tomorrow noon." They walked into the bedroom. My bedroom. The sanctuary where I had slept for 15 years. I kept my breathing shallow, rhythmic, the breathing of a man in a deep, drug-induced coma. Through my eyelashes, I saw them. Richard was wearing a casual sweater, looking relaxed as if he were walking into his own home. Emily was leaning against the doorframe, watching him with a hungry look that turned my stomach. He looks terrible, Richard said, standing over the bed. He looked down at me with the clinical detachment of a butcher eyeing a side of beef. The thallium is working faster than I thought. His hair is thinning out in patches. Good, Emily said, walking over to him. The sooner he is gone, the sooner we can leave this freezing city. I hate Chicago in the winter. I want the sun, Richard. I want that villa in Tuscany you promised me. Soon, baby, soon, Richard said. He reached out and pulled her close. They kissed right there, standing over my body. It wasn't a kiss of passion. It was a kiss of greed, of two predators celebrating a kill. The sound of it, wet and sloppy, made me want to scream, to leap up and strangle them both. But I lay still, my hand under the duvet, gripping the small voice recorder Mike had taped to my chest. They broke apart, and what happened next was the ultimate violation. They didn't leave the room. They didn't go to the guest room or a hotel. Richard sat on the edge of my bed, kicking off his shoes. Come here, he said, patting the mattress next to my legs. Emily laughed, a cruel, low sound. You are bad, Ricky. He is right there. He is a vegetable, Em. He doesn't know where he is. He doesn't know who he is. Besides, I like the risk. It makes it richer. She climbed onto the bed, crawling over my legs to get to him. I felt the mattress shift, the weight of their betrayal pressing down on me physically. I closed my eyes tight, focusing on the rhythm of my breath, forcing my heart not to explode in my chest. I listened to the sounds of their intimacy, the rustle of clothes, the murmurs of pleasure, and I cataloged every noise, every word, every shift in weight. I wasn't a husband anymore. I was a witness. I was a recording device. After what felt like a lifetime, the movement stopped. They lay there tangled together on top of the quilt, ignoring the dying man inches away from them. So the timeline, Richard said, his voice lazy and satisfied. Next week, Emily answered. Tuesday. It is our 5th anniversary. I have the party planned, caterers, flowers, the whole show. I invited all his old business partners, the lawyer, everyone. Why the big production? Richard asked. Why not just finish him now? Because Sarah Jenkins is suspicious, Emily hissed. That lawyer watches me like a hawk. If Bill dies before the anniversary or before he signs the new power of attorney, she will launch an investigation. I need witnesses, Richard. I need everyone to see how sick he is. I need them to see me cutting his meat for him, wiping his mouth. I need them to see the devoted wife caring for her senile husband. And then during the toast, I will have him sign the papers. He won't even know what he is signing. I will tell him it is a thank you card for the guests. Once I have power of attorney over the estate and the medical decisions, we can stop the charade. We put him in a home, Richard asked. Emily scoffed. A home? Do you know how much a good facility costs? No. I found a place in Gary, Indiana. Shady Pines or something miserable like that. It is state-funded, understaffed, and smells like urine. We dump him there. With his condition, he won't last a month without his special tea. I felt a tear leak from the corner of my eye. I couldn't stop it. It rolled down my temple and into my ear. Shady Pines. That was my retirement plan. A state-run hellhole while my wife lived in a Tuscan villa with my money and her brother. But the house, Richard asked. The market is soft. I already have a buyer, Emily said. A developer. He wants to tear it down and build condos. Cash offer. We close 2 weeks after Bill relocates. Tear it down. The house I built. The house where I thought we were happy. Richard sat up. The bed creaked. You are a genius, sis. A cold-hearted, beautiful genius. He leaned over and kissed her again. Then he stood up. I saw his shadow fall across my face. He leaned down close to me. I could smell his breath, coffee and mints. He peeled back my eyelid with a rough thumb. I let my eye roll back, staring unseeingly at the ceiling. He is deep under, Richard confirmed. Pupils are sluggish. You know, Em, maybe we should speed it up. Just a little. What do you mean? I mean, look at him. He is pathetic. And you are right about Sarah. She is sniffing around. If he lingers too long in that nursing home, he might say something lucid to a nurse. Loose ends are dangerous. Emily was silent for a moment. I held my breath. Okay, she said softly. Okay. Increase the dose. Starting tonight. I am tired of waiting. And frankly, I am tired of wiping up drool for this old man. Richard chuckled. Done. I will mix a new batch. Stronger. By Tuesday, he won't be able to hold a pen, let alone talk to a lawyer. You will have to guide his hand for the signature. I will do it, she said. I will guide him right into the grave. Richard walked to the door. I will see you tomorrow, baby. Do not forget to wash the sheets. He smells like old age. I will burn them, Emily said. The door closed. I heard Richard's footsteps fade down the stairs. Emily stayed on the bed for a moment longer. She reached out and patted my cheek, a hard, stinging slap disguised as a caress. Happy anniversary, Bill, she whispered. She got up and went into the bathroom. I heard the shower turn on. Under the heavy duvet, my hand formed a fist so tight my nails cut into my palm. The fear was gone. The sadness was gone. In their place was something cold and hard, something that felt a lot like the steel of the gates my father used to weld. They wanted to increase the dose. They wanted to guide my hand. I opened my eyes, fully staring at the ceiling of the room that had become my prison cell. Let them try, I thought. Let them try to guide my hand, because when they do, they are going to find out that this old man still has a grip, and I am not letting go until I drag them down with me. The next morning, the house was a flurry of activity that felt entirely disconnected from the murder plot unfolding within its walls. Caterers were bringing in crates of champagne and hors d'oeuvres through the service entrance. Florists were arranging white lilies that smelled disturbingly like a funeral parlor. And Emily was in the center of it all, conducting the orchestra of our anniversary celebration with a manic energy. She told me she was going to the spa for a few hours, to get ready for the big night, a necessary ritual for the grieving wife who needed to look her best while her husband deteriorated. As soon as her Range Rover disappeared down the driveway, the clock started ticking. I did not have much time. I threw off the heavy duvet and dressed quickly, choosing a thick wool coat to hide the fact that I had lost 10 pounds in 2 weeks. I did not take my car. Richard would recognize the engine noise if he was lurking nearby, and the GPS tracker Emily had installed for my safety would give me away instantly. Instead, I walked out the back door through the garden, where Mr. Whiskers used to hunt, and slipped through the hedge to the parallel street. A black sedan was waiting for me. Mike had arranged it. The drive to the loop was tense. I sat low in the back seat watching the gray Chicago skyline loom closer, feeling like a spy in a Cold War movie. When I arrived at Sarah Jenkins's office, she was already waiting for me in the conference room, a stack of documents sitting in the center of the table like a loaded weapon. She looked pale, her hands clasping a coffee mug tight enough to turn her knuckles white. She knew the risks. If Emily found out Sarah was helping me, Sarah would be the next target. We did not waste time with pleasantries. I sat down and picked up the pen. It felt heavier than a sledgehammer. These papers were the nuclear option. We were creating an irrevocable trust. In the eyes of the law, once I signed these documents, William Harrington, the individual, would no longer own his $28 million portfolio. The assets, the stocks, the bonds, even the liquid cash in the savings accounts were being transferred instantly into the control of a separate legal entity. I looked at the beneficiary line. The Poison Research and Domestic Violence Support Fund. It was a new entity Sarah had registered just yesterday. There was a clause buried deep in the legalese that allowed for a stipend to be paid to me if I survived, but the bulk of the estate was locked away. Emily could wave a power of attorney around until her arm fell off. She could forge my signature 1,000 times, but she could not access money that I no longer legally possessed. I signed my name. William J. Harrington. The ink flowed smoothly. With each loop of the letters, I felt a weight lifting off my chest. I was bankrupting myself to save my life. I was taking away the one thing Emily wanted more than her freedom. I was taking away the prize. Next came the last will and testament. I slashed a thick line through the paragraph that named Emily as my executor and sole beneficiary. In her place, I wrote in Sarah Jenkins as the executor with strict instructions to cooperate with law enforcement in the event of my suspicious death. I signed that too. "It is done," Sarah whispered, pulling the documents away as if they were hot. "The transfer is electronic. It will clear within the hour. By the time the guests arrive tonight, you will be a pauper on paper bill." I stood up, buttoning my coat. "I am not a pauper, Sarah. I am a man who just bought his freedom." The ride back was nerve-wracking. Traffic on Lakeshore Drive was backed up due to the rain, and I watched the minutes tick by on the dashboard clock. Emily's spa appointment ended at 2. It was already 1:45. If she beat me home, if she saw I was gone, the game was over. She would call Richard. They would panic. And panicked killers are sloppy, dangerous killers. The driver dropped me off at the back street again. I moved as fast as my aching joints would allow, pushing through the wet hedge, muddying my shoes in the soft earth of the garden. I let myself in through the kitchen door just as the garage door began to rumble open. I scrambled into the living room, threw my coat onto the chair, and collapsed onto the sofa, trying to control my breathing. I grabbed a magazine and opened it blindly, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The door from the garage opened. Emily walked in looking radiant. Her skin was glowing from a facial, her hair was blown out in soft waves, and she smelled of expensive oils. She stopped when she saw me. Her eyes narrowed, instantly scanning me, scanning the room. She noticed the mud on my shoes. She noticed the flush in my cheeks. "Where were you?" she asked, her voice sharp, cutting through the domestic facade. I checked the bedroom. "You were not there." I coughed, a wet, rattling sound that I didn't have to fake. "I went for a walk," I lied, my voice trembling. I wanted to see him. See who?" she snapped, dropping her keys on the counter with a loud clatter. "James," I said softly. I walked to the cemetery. I wanted to tell him about the anniversary. I wanted to say goodbye before tonight. It was a risky lie. The cemetery was 3 miles away. A healthy man could walk it, but the man I was pretending to be should have collapsed halfway there. But I banked on her ego. I banked on her believing that I was so pathetic, so lost in my dementia and grief, that I would wander into the rain to talk to a gravestone. Emily stared at me for a long moment. I could see the gears turning in her head. She looked at my muddy shoes again. The mud gave credence to the lie. She relaxed her shoulders, dropping an inch. A cruel, satisfied smile spread across her lips. "Oh, Bill," she said, walking over and brushing a piece of lint off my shoulder. "You really are losing it, aren't you? Walking all that way in the rain? You could have caught pneumonia." "I miss him, Emily," I whispered, looking down at my hands. "I miss my friend." She leaned in close, her breath warm against my ear. She smelled of lavender and malice. "Do not worry, darling," she murmured, her voice smooth as silk. "You do not have to miss him much longer. You will see him soon, very soon." She patted my cheek, a gesture that felt more like a slap, and straightened up. "Now go upstairs and wash up. Richard will be here in an hour to give you your vitamin shot before the party. We want you to be alert for the guests, don't we?" I nodded mutely and began the slow, painful climb up the stairs. Vitamin shot. That was their code. That was the lethal dose. Richard wasn't coming to perk me up. He was coming to put me down. He was going to inject me with enough thallium to simulate a massive heart attack, or a stroke right in the middle of the party, or perhaps just enough to make me pliable enough to sign the papers before I collapsed. I went into the bathroom and locked the door. I looked at myself in the mirror. I looked old. I looked tired. But for the first time in months, I didn't look like a victim. I reached into my pocket and touched the small vial of foaming agent Mike had given me. It was a simple capsule, something actors used. Chew it, and you foam at the mouth. It looks terrifying. It looks like a seizure. I checked the other pocket. The voice recorder. Fresh batteries. Tonight was the performance of a lifetime. I wasn't just fighting for my life anymore. I was fighting for justice. I was fighting for James. I washed the mud off my shoes, watching the brown water swirl down the drain. It looked like blood. "I am ready, Emily," I whispered to my reflection. I walked into the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, waiting for the doorbell to ring. Waiting for the doctor. Waiting to die so I could finally live. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 7 times, a deep and mournful sound that reverberated through the floorboards of the master bedroom. It was time. Downstairs, I could hear the faint murmur of the first guests arriving, the clinking of glassware, and the soft hum of a string quartet that Emily had hired to provide the soundtrack for what she believed would be my final public appearance. In the bedroom, the air was thick with the scent of her perfume, a heavy floral fragrance that barely masked the underlying smell of my own fear. I sat in the wingback chair by the window, dressed in my tuxedo, which hung loosely on my frame despite the tailor's best efforts to take it in. I looked like a scarecrow dressed up for a funeral, which I suppose was exactly the point. Emily stood in front of the full-length mirror, adjusting her diamond earrings. She looked magnificent in a way that made my skin crawl. Her black evening gown was tasteful, yet alluring, the kind of dress a grieving widow might wear to show she was still vibrant, still a catch. She caught my reflection in the mirror and smiled that same tight, predatory smile she had worn when she handed me the tea. "You look handsome, Bill," she lied, turning to face me. "Everyone is so excited to see you. But before we go down, there is just one little thing we need to take care of." She walked over to the small writing desk and picked up a leather folder. My heart began to pound, a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. This was it. The power of attorney. The key to the kingdom she thought she was conquering. "It is just some paperwork for the insurance, darling," she said, her voice dropping to that patronizing coo she used when she thought my mind was wandering. "You know how they are about the new policy. We just need your signature here and here." She placed the folder on my lap and pressed a heavy fountain pen into my trembling hand. I looked down at the document. The words swam before my eyes, not because I couldn't read them, but because the sheer audacity of it made me dizzy. It wasn't insurance paperwork. It was a durable power of attorney granting Emily Vance full control over my finances, my real estate, and my medical decisions. It was a death warrant signed in triplicate. I gripped the pen, letting my hand shake violently. I needed this to look real. I needed her to believe that I was so far gone, so physically compromised by the poison, that I couldn't even sign my own name correctly. Where I mumbled, slurring my words. "Where do I sign M? Right here, sweetheart?" she said, pointing to the line with the manicured fingernail. "Just right here." I lowered the pen to the paper. I felt her breath on my neck, hot and eager. I started to write. W-I-L. I let the pen slip, dragging a jagged line of ink across the page. "Oops," I whispered. "It is okay," she hissed, her patience fraying at the edges. "Just try again. Right next to it. Focus, Bill." I tried again. This time I didn't even try to form letters. I just scribbled a chaotic, illegible scrawl that looked nothing like the signature on the irrevocable trust documents I had signed with Sarah hours ago. It was the signature of a ghost, a man who no longer existed, legally or mentally. "There," I said, dropping the pen. "Did I do good?" "Perfect," she said, snatching the folder away before I could ruin it further. "You did perfectly." She checked the signature, her eyes gleaming. To her, that scribble was the combination to a safe containing $28 million. She didn't know the safe was already empty. She closed the folder and placed it on the desk, exhaling a long breath of triumph. Now she said, turning back to me, "We need to get you ready for the party. You look a little pale." The bedroom door opened, and Richard Sterling walked in. He was wearing a tuxedo as well, looking every inch the distinguished family doctor and friend. But in his hand he carried a small, velvet-lined case. "Time for your vitamin shot, Bill," he said, closing the door and locking it. "We want you to have energy for the guests. You don't want to fall asleep during the toast, do you?" I looked at the case. I knew what was inside. It wasn't vitamins. It was a concentrated dose of thallium, perhaps mixed with potassium chloride to stop the heart, or something to induce a massive stroke. It was the end of the line. I instinctively pressed my hand against my pocket, feeling the small hard lump of the foaming capsule I had prepared. I had already taken the second dose of the antidote in the bathroom, praying it would be enough to neutralize whatever cocktail he was about to push into my veins. "I don't want it," whined, shrinking back into the chair. "It hurts." "It is just a pinch, old friend," Richard said, walking over to me. He set the case down on the side table and opened it. The syringe was already filled. The liquid inside was clear and menacing. "Emily, hold his arm." Emily moved behind the chair, pinning my shoulders down. Her grip was iron strong. "Hold still, Bill," she whispered in my ear. "It will all be over soon. Just a little prick, and then you can sleep." Richard rolled up my sleeve. He didn't bother with an alcohol swab. He didn't bother finding a vein gently. He just jabbed the needle into my deltoid muscle with a brutal efficiency. I felt the burn immediately. It wasn't just the needle. It was the liquid cold and biting spreading through my muscle like fire. I gasped, my eyes widening. This was it. The moment of truth. Richard depressed the plunger, emptying the syringe. He pulled it out and tossed it back into the case. "There," he said, checking his watch. "That should take about 3 minutes. Just enough time to fix his tie." I waited. 1 minute. 2 minutes. I started to feel a strange heat rising in my chest. My heart began to flutter, an erratic bird trapped in a cage. The poison was working. It was faster than I expected. I needed to act now before I lost control of my own body. I reached up, pretending to scratch my lip, and slipped the capsule into my mouth. I bit down hard. The taste was vile, bitter, and soapy, exploding across my tongue. I mixed it with my saliva, letting the foam build. Then I let go. I let out a strangled, gurgling cry and threw my head back against the chair. I stiffened my legs, kicking out at the coffee table, sending a vase crashing to the floor. "Bill," Emily shouted, stepping back. I slid out of the chair onto the floor, my body convulsing in a violent, rhythmic seizure. I arched my back, my fingers clawing at the carpet. I let the white foam spill from my lips, bubbling down my chin and onto the lapel of my tuxedo. I rolled my eyes back into my head until all they could see was the whites. It was a performance born of desperation and fury. I thrashed, I gagged, I made sounds that no human should make. Through the haze of my acting, I saw them. Richard wasn't moving to help. He wasn't reaching for his medical bag. He was standing over me, watching with a cold, clinical fascination, his hands in his pockets. "Textbook," he muttered. "Looks like a massive cerebral event, or a heart attack triggered by the shock." Emily was standing by the window, her hand over her mouth. But she wasn't crying. She was waiting. "Is it happening?" she asked. "Is he dying?" "Just watch," Richard said. I kept thrashing for another 30 seconds, letting my movements become more sporadic, weaker, as if the life was draining out of me. I let out one final long, rattling breath, expelling the last of the foam, and then I went rigid. I held my breath. I had practiced this. I knew I could hold my breath for 90 seconds if I stayed calm. But staying calm while your murderers stand over you is a different beast. I forced my muscles to relax to go dead weight. I stared unseeingly at the ceiling, keeping my eyelids half open, unblinking, even as my eyes burned. Silence fell over the room. It was heavy and absolute. "Check him," Emily whispered. I felt Richard kneel beside me, his fingers pressed into the side of my neck, searching for the carotid artery. I used the technique I had read about, the one Mike had mentioned. I pressed my tongue hard against the roof of my mouth and bore down with my diaphragm, creating internal pressure that dampened the pulse. It wouldn't stop it completely, but to a rushed, arrogant doctor expecting death, it might be enough. Richard's fingers lingered for 5 seconds. 10 seconds. My lungs were screaming for air. My chest burned. Nothing Richard said standing up. No pulse. No respiration. He is gone. I fought the urge to gasp. I fought the urge to blink. I remained a statue of flesh and bone. Emily walked over. I saw the hem of her black dress stop near my face. She leaned down. I could smell her perfume again, overpowering and sickening. She looked into my open, staring eyes. She didn't close them. She didn't kiss my forehead. She didn't say a prayer. She reached out and nudged my shoulder with the toe of her high heel, a gesture of supreme disrespect. Finally, she said, letting out a breath that sounded like relief. "Finally, it is done." She turned to Richard. "Help me get him onto the bed," she said. "We need to make it look like he felt faint and went to lie down. Then we go downstairs, mingle for 20 minutes, and I come up to check on him and find him like this." "No," Richard said. "Leave him on the floor. It looks more dramatic. He collapsed getting ready. It sells the sudden heart attack narrative better." "True," Emily agreed. She walked to the mirror and checked her makeup. She smoothed her dress. She looked at my body one last time, a cold smile playing on her lips. "Good night, you stupid old man," she said softly. "Enjoy hell." She linked her arm through Richard's. "Let's go," she said. "I need a drink, and we have a performance to give." They walked to the door. Richard unlocked it. They stepped out into the hallway, and I heard the door click shut behind them. I waited. 1 second. 2. 3. I exploded upward, gasping for air, sucking in huge gulps of oxygen that tasted like victory. I coughed, wiping the foam from my mouth with the back of my hand. My heart was racing not from the poison, but from the adrenaline. I was alive. They thought I was dead. They had signed the death certificate in their minds. I crawled to the window and peered through the curtains. I saw them walking down the grand staircase, arm in arm, descending into the party, to play the grieving widow and the supportive friend. I sat back against the wall, trembling. The poison was in my system. I could feel a dull ache in my stomach, but the antidote was fighting it. I was weak, but I wasn't dying. Not tonight. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small earpiece Mike had given me. "I put it in my ear, Mike," I rasped. "They are gone. I am clear." I heard Mike's voice crackling with static, but clear enough. "Copy that, Bill. We got it all. The audio is crystal clear. The video from the vent camera is perfect. We have them. Now get to the service elevator. The hearse is waiting at the back door. But it is not a hearse. It is the getaway car." I stood up, my legs shaky but functional. I looked at the room one last time. The broken vase, the empty syringe case, the pen sats on the floor. It was a crime scene, and I was the evidence that was about to walk away. "I am coming," I said. I slipped out of the room, moving like a ghost through the house I used to own, leaving behind the corpse of William Harrington so that the man who survived could destroy them. I lay motionless on the cold hardwood floor of my bedroom, my body a heavy inert sack of bones and flesh. The silence in the room was suffocating, broken only by the distant, muffled sounds of laughter and clinking glasses from the party downstairs. My own guests were celebrating my anniversary while I lay dead, or so they thought, on the floor above their heads. Every muscle in my body screamed to move, to twitch, to take a deep, jagged breath, but I held on to the stillness with a terrifying discipline. I was a corpse. I had to be a corpse. The door handle turned. My heart gave a single painful thud against my ribs. Then I forced my mind into a meditative blankness. Richard walked back in his footsteps, heavy and confident. He was humming. He was actually humming a tune under his breath as he approached my body. It sounded like Sinatra. He knelt beside me, the fabric of his tuxedo rustling. I felt him place a clipboard on the floor, next to my head. The scratch of a pen against paper filled the air, loud and abrasive in the quiet room. He was signing my death certificate. He was writing out the end of William Harrington with the same casual indifference one uses to sign a receipt for a coffee. Acute myocardial infarction, he muttered to himself, the words vibrating in the air above me. Time of death. 8:42 p.m. No pre-existing conditions noted other than age-related hypertension. He paused, the pen hovering. Immediate cremation recommended due to, let's say, rapid tissue decomposition risk. That sounds official enough. He stood up, ripping the page from the pad. He took out his phone. I heard him dial a number. "Yeah, it is Dr. Sterling," he said into the phone. "I have a pickup at the Harrington estate. Yes, the big one on the corner. Patient is deceased. Male 70. No, do not bring the ambulance. Bring the van, the discreet one, and bring the heavy-duty bag. We are bypassing the morgue. Direct to the incinerator. I have the paperwork ready. How fast can you get here?" He listened for a moment. 20 minutes. Make it 10. There is an extra $5,000 in it for you if this body is ash before midnight. He hung up. 10 minutes. I had 10 minutes to lie here and pray that Mike's team was as good as he said they were. If the real crematory van showed up, if Richard's corrupt contacts arrived, before Mike's people intercepted the call, I was going to wake up in a fire. The thought sent a jolt of pure adrenaline through me, but I channeled it into rigidity. Emily came back into the room a moment later. She had a glass of champagne in her hand. I could smell the bubbles, the yeast, the celebration. "Is it done?" she asked. "Paperwork is signed," Richard replied. "The van is on its way." "What do we tell the guests?" "We tell them he felt tired and went to sleep," Richard said smoothly. "We let the party finish. We let everyone go home happy. Then in the morning you go in to wake him up with breakfast in bed, and oh no, poor Bill has passed away in his sleep. Tragedy. Heartbreaking. You call me, I come over, confirm the death, and we announce it. By then the body will already be smoke in a chimney across town." "It is brilliant, Ricky," she whispered. She walked over to where I lay. I felt her presence looming over me. She stood there for a long time. I wondered if she felt any guilt, any flicker of remorse for the 15 years we had spent together. She took a sip of her champagne. "You know," she said softly, looking down at my face, "I really did hate his laugh. It was so loud." Then she poured the rest of the champagne onto my face. The cold, sticky liquid splashed over my eyelids, ran into my nose, and trickled down my cheek. It took every ounce of willpower I possessed not to sputter, not to wipe it away. It burned my eyes, but I kept them dead and staring. "Oops," she giggled. A toast to the departed. She turned and walked out, Richard following her. They locked the door again. I lay there covered in drying champagne and sweat, counting the seconds. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes. The liquid was sticky on my skin. The floor was hard against my hip. I focused on the image of my father in the photo Alfred had given me. I focused on the anger. 8 minutes later, I heard a different sound. Not the front door, but the service elevator at the end of the hall. It whirred and clanked. Heavy boots hit the floor. There were voices, low and urgent. "Dr. Sterling," a rough voice called out. "We are here for the pickup." I heard Richard unlocking the bedroom door. "In here," Richard said. "And be quick about it. Use the service elevator. I do not want the guests seeing a body bag." 2 men entered the room. I risked a tiny slit of an opening with my eyes. They were wearing dark suits that looked a size too small, and they moved with a military precision that didn't fit the profile of a sloppy back-alley cremation crew. One of them, a big man with a scar on his chin, knelt beside me. He placed 2 fingers on my neck, pressing exactly where I had blocked the pulse earlier. "He is ready for transport," the man grunted. "Grab the legs," the other one said. They unrolled a black, heavy-duty body bag next to me. The sound of the zipper was the loudest thing in the world. It sounded like a mouth opening to swallow me whole. They lifted me. I went limp, letting my head loll back, my arms dangle. They were rough but not careless. They placed me inside the bag. The plastic smelled of chemicals and old rubber. "Zip him up," Richard commanded from the doorway. "I do not want to see his face anymore." The darkness came rushing in. The zipper traveled up my body, past my chest, past my neck. For a second, just a second, the light from the room lingered on my face, and then darkness. Total, absolute darkness. The air inside the bag was thick and hot. I took shallow, silent breaths, trying not to hyperventilate. I felt the bag being lifted. I swung in the air, suspended between life and death. I felt them walking the rhythm of their steps, transferring through the handles. "We are taking the service elevator," I heard Richard say. "My car is parked out back. Follow me." The elevator ride was a nightmare. The bag swayed. I bumped against the metal wall. I heard the ding of the floors passing. We were descending, going down into the bowels of the house I had built. When the doors opened, the cold night air hit the bag. We were outside. I heard the rain drumming against the plastic. I heard gravel crunching under tires. "Put him in the back," Richard ordered. "Here is the cash. 5,000. Do not open the bag until he is in the furnace. Do you understand?" "Understood, Doc," the scarred man said. The sound of van doors opening. I was tossed onto a metal floor. It was cold and hard. The doors slammed shut. The sound was final. A tomb ceiling. I lay there in the dark, my heart racing so fast I thought it would burst. The engine started. The van began to move. I felt the vibration of the road beneath me. We were moving. We were leaving the estate. We drove for what felt like 10 minutes, but was probably only 2. Then the van stopped. The engine didn't turn off, but the movement ceased. "Mr. Harrington." A voice came from the front seat. It wasn't the rough voice from before. It was calmer. It was Mike. I scrambled at the zipper from the inside, my fingers slipping on the plastic. The bag opened from the outside, flooding the space with the yellow light of a street lamp. I sat up, gasping for air, tearing the bag away from my body as if it were burning. I sucked in the damp night air, coughing, spitting the taste of foam and champagne from my mouth. Mike was sitting in the driver's seat, looking back at me through the partition. The scarred man was in the passenger seat, pulling off a wig. "You okay, Bill?" Mike asked. "You looked pretty dead back there." "I am alive," I croaked, wiping my eyes. "I am alive." "We pulled over just around the corner," Mike said. "Richard and Emily are still standing in the driveway. They are watching us leave. They think they just sent you to hell." I crawled to the small tinted window at the back of the van. I looked out into the rain-slicked night. Through the wrought iron gates of my estate, past the manicured hedges and the stone lions, I could see the house. It was glowing with light. The party was in full swing. And there, standing under the portico, sheltered from the rain, were 2 figures, Richard and Emily. They were holding champagne flutes. They were clinking glasses. Even from this distance, I could see the relief in their posture, the celebratory tilt of their heads. They were laughing. They were toasting to my murder. They thought the story was over. They thought they had won. They didn't know that the corpse they just paid to burn was watching them. I pressed my hand against the cold glass. The rage that filled me was no longer hot and chaotic. It was cold. It was absolute. It was the kind of rage that could burn a city down and not leave a trace of ash. "Smile, Emily." I whispered, my voice raspy but steady. "Smile while you can, because that is the last time you will ever taste champagne. That is the last time you will ever feel safe." I turned back to Mike. "Take me to the safe house," I said. "I have a funeral to attend, and I need to prepare my eulogy." Mike nodded and put the van in gear. We drove away into the night, leaving the dead man behind and carrying the Avenger forward. 3 days later, I sat in the dark living room of Mike's safe house, the glow of a 50-inch monitor illuminating my face with a ghostly blue light. On the screen was a high-definition live feed of the Graceland Cemetery. It was raining again, a cold gray drizzle that turned the Chicago skyline into a blur of steel and mist. In the center of the frame, surrounded by a sea of black umbrellas, was a mahogany casket. My casket. It is a strange thing to watch your own funeral. It feels like an out-of-body experience, a violation of the natural order. I stared at the polished wood of the box, knowing it was empty, or perhaps filled with sandbags to give the pallbearers something to carry. I wondered how much she had spent on it. Probably a fortune. Emily liked to spend money on things that people could see, things that projected the image of the grieving, devoted widow who spared no expense for her beloved husband. Mike was sitting next to me, adjusting the audio levels on a mixing board. He had planted a high-gain microphone inside the large wreath of white lilies standing right next to the gravesite, and another camera was hidden discreetly in the stonework of James's headstone, which was just a few yards away. We had the perfect vantage point. We were ghosts in the machine. "Here she comes," Mike said, pointing at the screen. A black limousine pulled up to the curb. The driver opened the door, and Emily stepped out. She was a vision of tragic beauty. She wore a black Dior dress that fit her perfectly, a wide-brimmed hat with a delicate veil that obscured her eyes just enough to make her look mysterious, and large, dark sunglasses. She was holding a handkerchief to her mouth, her shoulders shaking with what looked like uncontrollable sobs. Richard was right beside her, holding her elbow, playing the role of the steadfast family friend and doctor. I watched her walk toward the grave. She stopped to hug my Aunt Martha, a woman of 80 who was crying into a tissue. Emily held her for a moment, then pulled away, wiping a tear from her own cheek. It was a masterclass in manipulation. Every gesture, every stumble, every dab of the eyes was calculated for maximum emotional impact. She wasn't just attending a funeral. She was starring in one. She reached the front row of chairs and sat down, burying her face in Richard's shoulder. I turned up the volume on the speakers. I wanted to hear her. I wanted to hear the lies. The priest began to speak, reciting the standard verses about life and death, about ashes to ashes. He talked about my generosity, my business acumen, my love for my wife. He didn't know me. He was reading a script Emily had likely written for him. "Look at her," I whispered to Mike, anger bubbling in my chest. "Look at how she holds his hand." On the screen under the cover of her coat, I saw Emily's hand gripping Richard's. Her thumb was stroking his knuckles. It wasn't a gesture of comfort. It was a gesture of ownership. Suddenly there was a commotion near the back of the crowd. I leaned forward. It was my cousin Thomas. He was a retired police officer, a man who had never liked Emily. He pushed his way through the crowd, ignoring the hushed whispers of the other mourners. He walked right up to the casket and then turned to Emily. "Why is it closed?" Thomas demanded, his voice booming over the sound of the rain. "Why is the casket closed?" "Emily, Bill didn't have a scratch on him when I saw him last week." Emily froze. The crowd went silent. This was the conflict I had been waiting for. The crack in the facade. Richard stood up, puffing out his chest. "Thomas, this is neither the time nor the place. I want to see him," Thomas shouted, pointing at the box. I want to say goodbye to my cousin. Why was there no autopsy? Why was he cremated so fast? You rushed this whole thing. It stinks. Emily. Emily stood up slowly. She didn't yell. She didn't get angry. She did something far more effective. She began to weep. She let out a wail of such profound, gut-wrenching sorrow that half the crowd flinched. She took off her sunglasses, revealing eyes that were red and swollen, likely from rubbing them with onions before she left the house. "How dare you," she sobbed, her voice trembling. "How dare you imply that I rushed this? Do you think I wanted this? Do you think I wanted to wake up and find my husband dead?" She walked toward Thomas, her hands shaking. The doctor said it was his heart, she cried, gesturing to Richard. He collapsed. His face, when he fell, he hit the table. The damage was... It was awful, Thomas. I didn't want you to remember him like that. I wanted you to remember him as he was. I closed the casket to protect his dignity. She collapsed into Richard's arms, sobbing uncontrollably. The crowd turned on Thomas. I saw the glares, the shaking heads. They saw a grieving widow being attacked by a conspiracy theorist. They saw a woman protecting her husband's memory. Thomas looked around, realized he had lost the room, and backed down, muttering an apology that nobody heard. "She is good," Mike muttered. "She is terrifyingly good." I watched her on the screen. She wasn't just good. She was a professional. She had turned a legitimate question into an attack on her grief, and she had won. She had buried the truth under a mountain of fake tears. The service continued. The priest finished his prayer. People began to line up to place flowers on the casket. Emily stood by the grave, shaking hands, accepting condolences. She looked exhausted, fragile like a flower about to break in the wind. But then, as the crowd began to thin out, I saw her lean in close to Richard. They thought they were alone, or at least out of earshot. They didn't know about the microphone in the lilies 3 feet away. Mike boosted the audio gain. The background noise of the rain and the murmuring crowd faded, and their voices came through sharp and clear. "That was close," Richard whispered, keeping a fake smile plastered on his face for the onlookers. "Thomas is a problem." "He is nothing," Emily hissed back, her voice completely devoid of the tremor she had used seconds ago. "He is a nobody. Once the will is read, he can scream all he wants. Nobody listens to poor people." She paused, looking at the casket with a look of pure boredom. "God, this rain is ruining my shoes," she complained. "Can we wrap this up? I want to get to the house. The lawyer is waiting." "Patience, Em," Richard said. "Just a few more handshakes. Think about the prize." "I am thinking about it," she said, and a small, cold smile touched her lips. "I am thinking about Monaco. I booked the tickets this morning. First class. We leave on Friday. Just you, me, and $28 million. Monaco." Richard chuckled softly. "I like the sound of that. Goodbye, William. Thanks for the donation." I watched them. I watched my wife and her brother-lover plan their vacation over my empty grave. They were discussing flight upgrades while my family cried 10 feet away. The coldness of it, the absolute lack of humanity, made my blood turn to ice. They weren't just killers. They were monsters who wore human skin. Emily turned away from the grave and clapped her hands, calling for attention. The crowd quieted down. "Thank you all for coming," she said, her voice projecting clearly. "It means the world to me. I know Bill would have loved to see you all here." She paused for effect, wiping a non-existent tear. Bill was a man who believed in family, and he believed in order. He wouldn't want us standing here in the rain. He would want us to celebrate his life. So I invite you all back to the house. We have food and drinks. And, she took a deep breath, looking bravely at the crowd. And Sarah, his lawyer, is there. We are going to read his last will and testament. I want to get it done today. I want to honor his final wishes immediately. I don't want to wait. It is what he would have wanted. A murmur of agreement went through the crowd. They thought she was being efficient, brave. I knew she was just greedy. She couldn't wait another day. She couldn't wait another hour. She wanted the money in her hands before the dirt was even settled on the grave. Please join us, she said. Let's go home. She turned and walked back to the limousine, Richard trailing her like a loyal dog. The crowd began to disperse, heading for their cars. I watched the limousine pull away, splashing through a puddle. Turn it off, Mike, I said, standing up. Mike killed the feed. The room went dark. They are going to the house, I said, buttoning my jacket. They are going to read the will. They are in for a surprise, Mike said, grabbing his keys. I walked to the door. I wasn't shaking anymore. My hands were steady. My heart was a slow, heavy drum. I wasn't sick. I wasn't weak. I was the storm that was about to break over their heads. Let's go, I said. I don't want to be late for my own party. We walked out into the rain, leaving the safe house behind. The drive to the mansion would take 20 minutes. 20 minutes until the end of Laura Sullivan's. 20 minutes until the resurrection of William Harrington. I hoped they had opened the good champagne. I was going to need a drink when this was over. The rain had followed us from the cemetery, drumming a relentless, mournful rhythm against the tall, arched windows of the estate. Inside the grand living room, the air was thick with the scent of damp wool, expensive catering, and the cloying perfume of white lilies. It was standing room only. Every chair, every sofa, every inch of the Persian rugs was occupied by friends, business associates, and distant relatives who had come to pay their respects to the late William Harrington. Or at least that is what they told themselves as they balanced plates of roast beef and shrimp cocktail on their knees. In reality, they were there for the spectacle. They were there to see how the widow held up, and more importantly, to see who would get a slice of the $28 million pie. Sarah Jenkins stood by the massive stone fireplace, her silhouette framed by the flickering light of the hearth. Next to her, mounted on a temporary stand, was an 80-inch flat-screen television that looked obscenely large and out of place in the somber setting. A single HDMI cable snaked from the back of the screen to a laptop perched on a side table. Sarah looked pale, her hands clasping a remote control as if it were a detonator, which in a way it was. Emily sat in the front row holding court on the velvet settee. She had removed her veil, allowing everyone to see her red-rimmed eyes and the brave, trembling smile she offered to anyone who made eye contact. Richard was seated right next to her, his thigh pressing against hers, offering physical and emotional support that crossed the line of propriety just enough to make the older aunts whisper behind their hands. They looked like a portrait of shared grief. They looked like they had won. Sarah cleared her throat. The sound was amplified by the sudden hush that fell over the room. The clinking of silverware stopped. The murmurs died down. All eyes turned to the lawyer. "Thank you all for coming back to the house," Sarah began, her voice steady despite the tension radiating from her frame. William was a man who valued transparency. He valued truth, and he left specific instructions regarding his final wishes. Emily nodded solemnly, dabbing the corner of her eye with a lace handkerchief. She squeezed Richard's hand. I could practically hear her thoughts. She was expecting a video of me, perhaps recorded months ago, when I was first diagnosed with the fake heart condition. She expected me to be sitting in my study looking frail and confused, telling everyone how much I loved my beautiful wife and how I wanted her to have everything. She was ready to cry on cue. She was ready to accept the applause of a sympathetic audience. Before we proceed to the reading of the written will, Sarah continued. William recorded a video message. He wanted you all to see this. He said it was the only way to ensure his true legacy was understood. Sarah pointed the remote at the screen and pressed play. The massive screen flickered to life. There was a moment of static, a burst of digital noise that made a few people flinch. Then the image stabilized. It wasn't the study. It wasn't a professional recording. It was a high-angle shot, black and white, grainy, but perfectly sharp. It was the master bedroom. A ripple of confusion went through the room. I saw Emily frown, her hand freezing halfway to her face. She recognized the room. She recognized the angle. It was the view from the ventilation grate. On the screen, the timestamp in the corner read 7:15 p.m. 2 nights ago. The night of the anniversary party. The night I died. The door in the video opened. Richard and Emily walked in. They were dressed for the party. The audio was crisp, capturing the rustle of their clothes and the click of their heels on the hardwood. "Time for your vitamin shot," Bill the Richard on the screen said. The room gasped. It was a collective intake of breath that sucked the oxygen out of the space. On the screen, Richard pulled out the syringe case. He didn't look like a doctor caring for a patient. He looked like an executioner. Emily sat up straighter, her face draining of all color. Her grip on Richard's hand tightened into a claw. "We want you to have energy for the guests," the video Richard said. "You do not want to fall asleep during the toast, do you?" I watched the crowd. Their confusion was turning into horror. They watched as the Richard on the screen injected me. They watched as I began to convulse. They watched mesmerized and terrified as I foamed at the mouth and thrashed on the floor. But the horror truly set in when the thrashing stopped. On the screen, my body went still. The silence in the living room mirrored the silence in the video. Then came the voices that would damn them forever. "Check him," the Emily on the screen whispered. Richard checked my pulse. Nothing. No pulse. No respiration. He is gone. In the living room, someone dropped a glass. It shattered on the floor, but no one looked down. They were glued to the screen. They watched Emily lean over my body. They expected tears. They expected a scream of anguish. Instead, they saw her nudge my shoulder with her foot. They saw the look of utter disdain on her face. Finally, the Emily on the screen said, letting out a long breath, "Finally, it is done." A woman in the back row screamed. It was a short, sharp sound of disbelief. Emily flinched as if she had been slapped. She looked around the room, her eyes wide with panic, realizing that the narrative she had carefully constructed was crumbling second by second. But the video wasn't done. It played on relentless. "We need to make it look like he felt faint and went to lie down," the Emily on the screen plotted. "Then we go downstairs, mingle for 20 minutes, and I come up to check on him and find him like this." No, the Richard on the screen countered. "Leave him on the floor. It looks more dramatic." He collapsed getting ready. It sells the sudden heart attack narrative better. The murmurs in the room turned into a roar. People were standing up. My cousin Thomas was pointing at the screen, his face purple with rage. Aunt Martha had fainted, slumping against her chair. Then came the final nail in the coffin. The camera captured Emily walking to the mirror, checking her makeup, smoothing her dress over her hips. She looked at my corpse one last time. "Good night, you stupid old man," she said, her voice amplified by the speakers echoing off the high ceilings of the room. "Enjoy hell." And then just before they walked out the door, she added the line that sealed her fate. "Make sure the crematorium is ready, Ricky. I want him burning before the champagne gets warm. I am tired of wiping up drool for this old man." Sarah hit the pause button. The image froze on Emily's smiling, triumphant face. The silence that followed was heavy, dangerous, the kind of silence that precedes a riot. "This is a lie." The scream tore from Emily's throat, raw and desperate. She jumped to her feet, knocking over the coffee table. Her face was twisted ugly with fear. She pointed a shaking finger at the screen. "It is fake. It is AI. It is a deepfake. Someone made this. William was sick. You all saw him. He was sick." She looked around the room, begging for an ally, begging for someone to believe her. but she found only walls of disgust. The faces that had looked at her with pity 5 minutes ago were now looking at her like she was a monster. Richard, unlike Emily, didn't waste time screaming. He was a creature of self-preservation. He saw the shift in the room. He saw Thomas advancing toward him with fists clenched. He saw the way the other men in the room were blocking the path to the kitchen. He bolted. Richard shoved Emily aside, sending her sprawling onto the sofa, and sprinted toward the main foyer doors. He moved fast, fueled by the adrenaline of a trapped rat. He shoved past an elderly couple, knocking them aside, and lunged for the heavy oak doors that led to freedom, to his car, to the airport. He grabbed the handle and threw the door open, ready to run into the rain. But the doorway was blocked. 2 men stood there. They were massive, wearing dark raincoats that dripped onto the marble floor. They were Mike's private security, former military, and they looked like stone walls. "Going somewhere, doctor?" the one on the left asked, his voice low and menacing. Richard tried to stop, but his momentum carried him forward. The guard simply stepped in, grabbed Richard by the lapels of his tuxedo, and shoved him backward. Richard flew back into the foyer, slipping on the polished floor and landing hard on his back. He scrambled backward, crab-walking away from the door, his eyes darting around for another exit. But there were no exits. The windows were locked. The kitchen door was blocked by Thomas. Emily was still screaming on the sofa, a litany of denials that made no sense. "It is a trick. Sarah did this. She wants the money." Sarah stood calm by the fireplace. She didn't look at Emily. She looked at the closed double doors of the library situated at the far end of the room. "We have one more witness," Sarah said, her voice cutting through Emily's shrieks. "Someone who can verify the authenticity of that video." The room fell silent again. Even Emily stopped screaming, her chest heaving. She looked at the library doors. Slowly, dramatically, the doors began to open. A hush fell over the crowd, a silence so profound you could hear the rain hitting the glass. From the shadows of the library, a figure emerged. He was sitting in a wheelchair pushed by Mike. He was pale. He looked older than 70. But he was breathing. His eyes were open. And they were locked on his wife. "William," someone whispered. Emily let out a sound that wasn't human. It was a strangled, high-pitched keening noise. She scrambled backward on the sofa, pressing herself against the cushions as if trying to merge with the upholstery. She looked like she was seeing a ghost. In a way, she was. I rolled into the room. I didn't say a word. I just let them look at me. I let them see the man they had murdered, the man they had cremated, the man whose money they had already spent in their heads. I stopped the wheelchair in the center of the room, right in front of the frozen image of Emily on the TV screen. I looked at the digital, Emily smiling and cruel, and then I looked at the real Emily, broken and terrified. "Hello, Emily," I said. My voice was raspy, damaged from the poison and the foaming agent, but it carried to the back of the room. "You said you wanted to go to Monaco. You said you booked the tickets." I reached into my jacket pocket. Emily flinched, thinking I had a gun, but I pulled out a single piece of paper. It was a printout of an airline ticket. "I found this in your desk," I said. "First class." "Nice. But I am afraid you are going to miss your flight." I tore the paper in half, the sound ripping through the silence. "I canceled it for you. But do not worry. I booked you a new trip. It is a short drive. State transport. One way. To the Illinois Department of Corrections." I turned my gaze to Richard, who was still on the floor, trembling. "And you, Richard. I heard you enjoyed the coffee at the funeral service this morning. I made sure the caterers used a special blend just for you. I hope you brought a change of pants. Because where you are going, the toilets do not have seats." Sirens began to wail in the distance, getting louder and louder. Blue and red lights flashed through the front windows, painting the room in the colors of the law. "The game is over," I said. And for the first time in 5 years, I smiled. Not a polite smile, not a husband's smile. It was the smile of a man who had walked through fire and come out holding the match. The wail of the sirens outside reached a deafening crescendo, vibrating against the window panes like a physical force trying to shatter the glass. The blue and red strobe lights cut through the elegant gloom of the living room, strobing across the terrified faces of the guests and the frozen waxen figures of my wife and her lover. The room was suspended in a state of absolute suffocating tension, the kind of silence that exists in the split second before a dam breaks. Sarah stepped forward, her voice cutting through the noise with the authority of a judge handing down a sentence. She pointed a steady finger at the double doors of the foyer. "Officers," she shouted, her voice ringing clear. "They are in here!" The heavy oak front doors exploded inward with a violence that made the crystal chandelier tremble. A team of uniformed officers and detectives swarmed into the grand foyer, their boots thudding heavily against the marble, a stark contrast to the polite clicks of dress shoes that had filled the space only hours before. They moved with a tactical precision that turned my anniversary party into a crime scene in the blink of an eye. Richard, who had been scrambling on the floor like a trapped insect, froze as the beam of a tactical light hit his face. He threw his hands up instinctively, his face a mask of blinding terror. Emily was still pressed into the corner of the sofa, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly, her eyes darting between me, the police, and the screen, where her own voice was still echoing from the paused video. I decided it was time to stand. I gripped the armrests of the wheelchair Mike had used to bring me in. My legs were weak, the muscles atrophied from the poison and the lack of food, but my will was made of iron. I reached for the heavy ebony cane I had tucked into the side of the chair. I planted it firmly on the Persian rug. With a groan of effort that I did not try to hide, I pushed myself up. The room gasped again. To them, I was a man who had died 3 days ago. To see me not only alive, but standing rising like Lazarus from the grave, was too much for some. I saw my Aunt Martha cross herself. I stood tall, leaning heavily on the cane, but keeping my spine straight. I walked. It was a slow, shuffling gait, but it was forward motion. I moved toward the sofa where Emily was cowering. The police held back for a moment, sensing the gravity of the confrontation. They let the dead man have his say. I stopped 3 feet from her. She looked up at me, her mascara running in black rivers down her cheeks, ruining the perfect complexion she had spent thousands of dollars to maintain. She looked small. She looked pathetic. She looked exactly like what she was, a con artist whose luck had finally run dry. "Bill," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Bill, please, I can explain. It was him. It was all him. He forced me." She pointed a shaking finger at Richard, who was currently being shoved against the wall by 2 officers, his hand being wrenched behind his back. I looked down at her, feeling absolutely nothing. The love I had held for her for 15 years had evaporated, leaving behind only a cold, hard clarity. "Hello, Emily," I said, my voice raspy but projecting to every corner of the silent room. I reached into the inner pocket of my tuxedo jacket. Emily flinched, pulling her knees to her chest. I pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was the printout of the flight confirmation I had found in her desk drawer earlier that day while she was at the spa. "You said you wanted to go to Monaco?" I continued unfolding the paper slowly. "You booked the tickets. First class. Window seats. You were going to drink champagne over the Atlantic while I burned in an oven." I let the paper drift from my fingers. It fluttered down, landing on her lap. "I canceled your reservation, Emily, but do not worry. Not. I booked you a new trip. It is a short drive. State transport. One way. To the Illinois Department of Corrections." She let out a strangled sob, burying her face in her hands. "Officer," I said, not looking away from her. "She is all yours." 2 female officers stepped forward. They weren't gentle. They grabbed Emily by her arms and hauled her up from the sofa. She kicked and screamed, her heels scraping against the floor, her dignity stripping away with every shriek. "No, no, I am Mrs. William Harrington. You can't touch me. This is my house." "It is not your house, Emily," I said calmly. "It never was, As they dragged her toward the door, I turned my attention to Richard. He was handcuffed now, his face pressed against the silk wallpaper of the foyer. He was sweating profusely, his skin a sickly shade of gray. He looked at me with eyes full of hate and fear. "And you, Richard," I said, limping over to him. I leaned in close so only he and the officers could hear. "I heard you enjoyed the coffee at the funeral service this morning. I made sure the caterers used a special blend just for you." Richard's eyes widened. He shifted uncomfortably, clamping his legs together. "I put a triple dose of industrial-strength laxative in the pot, Richard. It should be kicking in right about now." As if on cue, a look of absolute horror crossed his face. His stomach let out a loud, wet gurgle that was audible even over the commotion. He groaned, twisting against the handcuffs, panic overriding his arrogance. "I hope you brought a change of pants," I whispered. "Because where you are going, the toilets do not have seats, and the privacy is limited." "Take him away," the sergeant barked. Richard was marched out, walking with a strange, stiff-legged shuffle, his face twisted in a grimace of agony that had nothing to do with the handcuffs. I turned back to the room. The guests were staring at me, their mouths agape. My cousin Thomas walked over, tears streaming down his face. He didn't say a word. He just grabbed me in a bear hug, burying his face in my shoulder. I patted his back, feeling the first real human warmth I had felt in months. Outside, the circus had arrived. Through the open doors, I could see the flashbulbs of the paparazzi popping like lightning. The news vans had blocked the driveway. Emily and Richard were being paraded past the cameras, their heads bowed the grieving widow, and the family doctor, now exposed as the monsters they were. I walked to the doorway, leaning on my cane. The rain was still falling, washing the city clean. I watched as the police cars swallowed them up. I watched the red taillights fade into the distance, taking with them the fear, the poison, and the lies. Sarah walked up beside me. She handed me a glass of water. "It is over, Bill," she said softly. I took a sip. The water was cool and clean. It tasted better than any champagne I had ever drunk. "No, Sarah," I said, watching the last of the police lights disappear around the corner. "It is not over. It is just beginning." I turned back to the house, to the empty foyer, to the shattered remnants of my old life. It was a mess. But it was my mess. And for the first time in a long time, I had the broom. 2 months had passed since the sirens faded into the rain-soaked night of my anniversary party. The calendar said it was late spring, but for me, it felt like the first true day of my life. I stood on the manicured grass of the cemetery, the sun warming the back of my neck, a stark contrast to the gray weeping sky that had overseen my own fake funeral just weeks ago. I wasn't hiding behind a camera lens this time. I wasn't a ghost watching from a safe house. I was standing tall, my spine straight, my hands steady, the tremors that had plagued me for months now, nothing more than a bad memory washed away by Prussian blue and justice. I looked down at the granite headstone. James's name was carved into the cold stone, simple and unpretentious, just like the man himself. I reached into my coat pocket, not for a weapon or a recording device, but for a bottle. It was a 25-year-old single malt, the kind James used to say tasted like smoke and history. I uncorked it, the rich aroma drifting up to mix with the scent of fresh-cut grass. "You were right, you stubborn old goat," I said to the stone, my voice thick with emotion, but clear of the raspy weakness that the poison had inflicted. "You were right about everything." I poured a generous measure onto the earth at the base of the headstone, watching the amber liquid seep into the soil, sharing one last drink with the man who had saved me from beyond the grave. "I did it, James." I continued, the wind rustling the leaves of the oak tree above us. I finished the job. The trial didn't take long. When the jury saw that video, when they saw the look on her face as she poured champagne on what she thought was my corpse, it was over. They didn't even deliberate for an hour. I took a sip from the bottle myself, the burn familiar and grounding. Emily or Laura or whatever name she is using in her nightmares, now she is gone. Life without parole. The judge called her a predator. He said society needed to be protected from her. And Richard, well, let's just say the medical board didn't take too kindly to a doctor using his prescription pad as a murder weapon. He is in maximum security. They tell me he cries at night. I crouched down, brushing a stray leaf from the letters of his name. I survived, James. I am clean. The doctors say my levels are back to normal. My hair is growing back. I gained 15 pounds. I look like myself again. But I am not myself. I am the man you helped me become. I stood up and looked out over the cemetery rows. It was a city of the dead, but I was no longer a citizen. I had revoked my residency. I sold the house, James. I couldn't stay there. I couldn't walk into that kitchen without seeing her brewing that tea. I couldn't sit in the living room without seeing the dead ficus tree. I sold it to that developer she was talking about. He is going to tear it down next week. Good riddance. Let them turn it into condos. Let them bury the memories under concrete and steel. I paused, thinking about the check that was currently sitting in the new bank account I had opened, the one Emily never knew about. I took the money, James. All of it. The sale of the house, the portfolio, everything. But I am not buying a villa in Tuscany. I am not buying a yacht. I sat down with Sarah yesterday, and we drafted the charter. I smiled, imagining James's reaction. It is called the James and William Initiative. We are going to fund private investigators for families who suspect foul play but can't get the police to listen. We are going to fund toxicology research for rare poisons. We are going to help the victims of financial vampires like Emily get their lives back. You are going to be catching bad guys forever, my friend. Your name is on the door. I corked the bottle and placed it gently next to the headstone hidden behind a vase of fresh flowers. I have to go now, I said, buttoning my coat. I have a meeting with an architect. We are building the new headquarters. But I will be back. I will always come back. I turned and walked away, my footsteps crunching on the gravel path. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I carried him with me. I walked to the parking lot, where my new car was waiting. It wasn't a sensible sedan. It wasn't a family car. It was a vintage convertible cherry red with white leather seats. It was the kind of car a man buys when he realizes that waiting for the right moment is a fool's game. I slid into the driver's seat and turned the key. The engine roared to life, a deep, throaty growl that vibrated through the steering wheel. I put on my sunglasses and lowered the top. I pulled out of the cemetery and turned onto Lake Shore Drive. The city of Chicago rose up on my left, a skyline of glass and ambition, and to my right, the vast blue expanse of Lake Michigan stretched out to the horizon. The sun was high and bright, making the water sparkle like millions of diamonds. I pressed down on the accelerator. The wind rushed over the windshield, whipping my hair, cooling my skin. It felt like freedom. It felt like a second baptism. I drove past the exit for the Gold Coast. I didn't even glance at it. That part of my life was a closed book, a story told by an unreliable narrator. I was writing a new chapter now. The wind roared in my ears, drowning out the phantom echoes of Emily's lies. I thought about the tea. I thought about the honey. I thought about the sweetness that masked the rot. I spent 70 years building a fortune, building a reputation, building what I thought was a legacy. I spent 70 years thinking I knew how the world worked. I thought the monsters were in the dark alleys. I thought the danger was out there in the unknown. I gripped the wheel, feeling the power of the machine under my control. I looked at the road ahead, stretching out endlessly, full of possibility. I had been asleep for so long. I had been sleepwalking through a life of comfort and complacency, blind to the knife held against my throat by the hand that caressed my cheek. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the clean lake air. I spent 70 years learning the hardest lesson a man can learn. I learned that the most dangerous enemy is not the stranger in the night. It is not the man holding a gun in a dark alley. The most dangerous enemy is the one who smiles at you across the breakfast table. The one who holds a cup of tea mixed with honey and whispers that they love you. I shifted gears, the engine singing, as I sped up, leaving the shadows of the past in the rearview mirror. But now, thanks to a friend who loved me enough to tell me the truth from beyond the grave, I am awake, and I have never been more alive. I spent 70 years building an empire believing I could spot a lie a mile away. But I learned the hard way that the most dangerous deception doesn't come from a stranger in a dark alley. It comes from the person sleeping right beside you. My blindness wasn't born of stupidity, but of a desperate need for connection. True wealth isn't the millions in the bank. It is the integrity to stand up when you have been beaten down. Do not let comfort dull your instincts. Sometimes you have to lose everything to find the strength you never knew you had. If my story of survival and justice resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps me share these warnings with the world. Share this video with someone who needs to know it is never too late to fight back. Stay safe and stay vigilant.